This is the third in the series of Sitting with Suffering, and in this video we'll be thinking about suffering and others. And I'll start off with a few verses from Romans 12, which says, "Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. Share with the Lord's people who are in need. Practice hospitality. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Mourn with those who mourn." So far in this series, we've laid some foundations in thinking about suffering, and we've thought about our own response to suffering. Last session, in case you missed it, I highlighted the importance of being able to sit with, to tolerate our own discomfort, to feel our feelings. And I said that was really important for us to do for ourselves, but also that it helps us to be able to sit with and to tolerate the suffering of others. Because I think so many of the ways that we can do people a disservice as we seek to support them is to try to move them out of the suffering, to jolly them along. We want to fix things and to make things better. It's hard to watch people in pain. And there's even the risk that we mistake our strong desire for things to get better as though God had guaranteed that they definitely will get better this side of eternity. I can think of several friends years ago who were really struggling with singleness. It was desperately painful for them. Both were told by the church at the time that God would provide a husband for them soon. And one of them died unmarried without the opportunity ever to get married. And the other walked away from the church when soon didn't bring about her husband. Might they have been better served by acknowledging their pain, sitting with it, being curious about what God was up to in that pain? I don't think those false reassurances came from an evil or misleading place deliberately. They were well meant, but ultimately they were avoiding sitting with the suffering. There's another risk, which is we might, if things feel particularly frustrating, secretly blame the person for their suffering. If only they were a bit more positive and didn't dwell on things so much. We might be tempted to reach for phrases like "cheer up, could be worse," or "oh no, what's wrong now?" And as Christians, we have this extra tool in our toolkit, that of avoidance through spiritual bypassing. We thought about that in the previous video, but just to remind us, spiritual bypassing is when we use spiritual things to avoid the pain of processing our emotions. And so we can do this for ourselves, which is partly what we considered last week, but the phrase is most regularly used to think about what Christians do unhelpfully to one another. It is to say, I want to bypass that part of town. I don't want to drive through that part of town. I know a shortcut. The trouble is, if your journey's purpose is to meet someone in suffering, you can't get to them unless you go through that part of town. We cannot avoid suffering. We can't avoid our own suffering, and we can't avoid the suffering of others, especially if we're wanting to help people. And there are many dangers of this avoidant approach to suffering when we try to support someone. But one of the dangers is that it simply isn't helpful for them, and it might compound what they're already feeling. That if they already feel alone and isolated in their pain, this is just going to make things worse. Other people don't understand what they're going through. Worse still, other people might believe that it's their fault that they're suffering. We're told in Romans 12 that I read out earlier on to rejoice with those who rejoice and to mourn with those who mourn, not to cheer up those who mourn or to encourage those who mourn to rejoice instead. We're told to mourn with them. We started this mini-series thinking about the book of Job, and in the second chapter of Job, his three friends travel to meet him because they've heard about his suffering. And we pick this up from verse 12. It says, "When they saw him from a distance, they could hardly recognize him. They began to weep aloud, and they tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their heads. Then they sat on the ground with him for 7 days and 7 nights. No one said a word to him, because they saw how great his suffering was." Job's friends start out really well. They meet Job in the place of suffering. They see his suffering, and they don't, at this point, try to make sense of things or to jolly him out of his pain. They mourn with him, and they sit with him on the ground in discomfort for 7 days and 7 nights. And what do they say? Nothing, because they see how great his suffering is. Words are not going to fix pain like this. But quiet companionship, that gentle sitting alongside, is so powerful. Now, I'm not suggesting that we should force someone who's suffering into silence, but we needn't try to come up with the answers. Just acknowledging how difficult the suffering is can be really helpful. Validating someone's pain, being able to tolerate the suffering and the lack of answers, that's great help. It reassures the person suffering that they are not isolated in their pain. They're not alone. I think this is so precious, this being with in the pain. Jesus is all about being with. He is Emmanuel, God with us. When we're thinking about supporting someone in suffering, I think there are several layers. The first being just getting through, just surviving what's happening, being with, getting through appointments or treatment, supporting someone to adjust to loss or massive changes in life. Of course, praying that God might intervene and ease things where that's appropriate. Then there's another part which is more about being attentive to God's work, supporting the person to be curious about what God might be doing, or noticing after the event what God might have been doing. Now, for some people, this second part might be really out of reach, at least to begin with, but possibly at all. But for some, encouraging attentiveness to what God may be doing could be really helpful. We left Job's friends when they were doing a decent job of supporting him. But spoiler alert, they don't smash things from here on in. They try to sense make as to why this suffering has come upon Job. And basically, they suggest that Job must have done something bad for all of these bad things to happen, which is unhelpful. And at the end of Job, we read that God is angry with these 3 friends because they have not spoken truth about God in the way that Job has. And Job is invited to pray for mercy for his friends, which he does. So let's not be like Job's friends once they started speaking. Having started so well, they become a lesson in what not to do. We don't need to try to come up with neat and tidy answers. But if we're serious about helping people in difficulty, we must be willing to sit with suffering.